Hey everybody, Ramdean and Black with you here in our downtown studios. The UFC announced a bunch of bouts for a bunch of different shows going down in April. We have the former Bellator champion Will Brooks taking on Charles Oliveira at 155 pounds. A very exciting matchup. That's set to go down April 8th at UFC 210, which goes down in Buffalo, New York. A very interesting fight. But for Will Brooks, he knows how to slow things down. Charles Oliveira is super explosive in the stand-up department. He'll choke your lights out or rip off a limb if the fight goes down to the ground. But Will Brooks, big, powerful, strong, but above all, very intelligent. And if he has to slow this fight down and make it dull, he will.
Oliveira has that vibe of that dual specialist. Out on the feet, chaos for you. And on the ground, get to your back, choke you, play a game, really dominate you using true jiu-jitsu, the purity of the submission game. And so how do you beat a guy like that? You wrestle him. You make it a wrestling match. You put him up against the fence, you stick your head under his chin, you smash away on his body, and if you get it down to the ground, you stick your head under his chin, you put your hands in his biceps, and you smash him up. There is a direct outline for Will Brooks to win this fight in a way that he's comfortable playing, in a way that he's very, very good at, and that's what he's going to look to do, and it'll be on Oliveira to stop him.
When you think about that, and we look at 155 pounds and how deep this division is, if you're a guy like Will Brooks, you're a Bellator champion, you're going over to the UFC for the biggest paydays of your career. Well, the biggest paydays are going to come when you get your crack at a UFC championship. When you have a performance like you're describing, where you grind things out, you get the 30-27 decision, how far up the ladder do you move?
I think you just got to be super aggressive, and you got to have an ornery streak when you play this game. And I know you make a good point that the audience responds to guys who lay it all on the line. You know, guys who, let it.
The UFC responds that way too.
The UFC responds that way too. But you got to win. You got to win, and you got to keep going, because at some point one of these fights will happen. At some point the chaos and the madness will happen in a fight. We aren't looking for it. We're looking to win, and if and when that arises, we'll rise to the occasion.
A couple of other fights announced. Rose Namajunas taking on the karate hottie Michelle Waterson, set to go down April 15th, and Cub Swanson taking on Conor McGregor's guy Artem Lobov. I think that the fight with Cub and Lobov is the fight that I'm the most interested in. I'm surprised it's Lobov that's Cub Swanson's opponent, considering the performance we saw at UFC 206 in Toronto.
I know Cub Swanson, and I know that he is not going to underestimate Lobov. The audience is. The audience is doing it right now.
You love Lobov, though, right?
This guy's a very, very good fighter. I'm really excited. When Cub Swanson makes his art, I make my art with his art.
Yeah.
I go in, I study him, and I want to break it down. And I'm excited to do that with this fight too, because look at that fight with Ishihara. Take out whatever false narrative you have about Artem Lobov in your head. Something you heard somebody else say about how much he sucks, or why you don't like him because Conor McGregor, his friend, made sure he got back on the TV show, or whatever. Just look at that fight with Ishihara. Just look at that fight. That's a real dangerous fighter right there. That's a guy who has the power to hurt you, but he also has an understanding of how the distance between you is shared and manipulated, and that's a very dangerous guy. When a guy can get to your chin like that and understands where you are in space compared to him, that is a dangerous guy. And because of that, Cub Swanson will take him very, very, very seriously, and because of that, this fight's going to be killer.
Rose and Michelle Waterson, 115 pounds. You would imagine the winner of that fight will be considered one of the top fighters to challenge Joanna Jędrzejczyk for the strawweight championship.
Yes, I believe that. We're interested to see when the karate hotted Paige Van Zandt. She really, literally, the team was just like, just play an old school sort of Taekwondo karate game. Just hook kicks and working from the outside, which is not what Stephen Thompson does. Stephen Thompson takes some of those tools and applies it to a modern game, whereas the karate hottie was just like, yeah, just fight her like that and you'll win. And she did, and it was wicked. But you can't do that with Rose. You cannot do that. You just go into YouTube and look up Taekwondo or karate versus Muay Thai. And that's what'll happen to you. Rose will kick the shit out of your legs. She will smash your beautiful legs. So she's going to have to adapt that game. Rose is a super dangerous fighter.
Waterson, do you think she makes it a grappling match? We all look at her background in traditional stand-up martial arts, but she's well versed. I think it's one of the areas, her throws, especially if you can get in close, that it's one of the most underrated elements of her game. Does she make it about that?
Yeah, and Rose is dangerous there too.
Yeah.
And when we like to go in and watch the open workouts to sort of study some of the movement, and of all the athletes I've watched, there's something about the way that Rose's 2 shoulders and 2 hips, the way that they move independently of each other, she's very talented, that woman, that young lady is very incredibly talented. But what's so tricky about trying to analyze any of these fights is there's real disparity between skill levels of many of these girls. So when we get to the top ones, like Waterson and Rose Namajunas, the context of who they fought last doesn't let us compare their skills that well. So it's very difficult to say which one will be better when they get into chest-to-chest range and grapple in there, which is why these fights are so interesting, because they're hard to predict. Once we've seen these fighters fight 6 and 8 other fighters, and the pecking order is more firmly established, we'll be able to have a little better insight. But you go into these fights with a lot of unknowns, and that's why they're fun to watch.
A bunch of cool fights announced for the UFC over the next number of months.